I have a prediction for you. Next year will be the year of AI adoption, of AI transformations. What I mean by that is that we expect that a lot of companies who do software development will adopt AI, and this will change the way they work. Now, there are various ways of adopting AI, so let's look today at how this might happen. We don't know yet, but let's try to look a little bit into it. Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca, and I'm coming at you from the Mozaic Works studios. And today I want to talk about the next step in AI transformations and what this will bring along. First, if you like this type of videos, like, share, subscribe, leave us a comment. We love comments. We just answered all the comments that were added in the past few weeks. And we have good conversations, so we always enjoy that. Also, this channel is not taking any promotions or anything like that. It's mostly about interesting things that we found useful and interesting. And occasionally we talk about our learning programs, but that's about it. So we rely on your support for promoting it. Now let's get to business. So AI is here to stay. This is the first thing that we need to take into account. No matter what people are saying, that it's a bubble, maybe that there are a lot of money going around in circles in between AI companies. However, no matter what will happen on the financial side, maybe it is a bubble, maybe it will burst. There are ethical concerns which we discussed at length in a specific video. AI tools are here to stay, and they will change the way we do a lot of things. Now, first of all, when you do such a transformation, you want to look at your value stream. So you look at what happens in this case, since we are talking about software development. The value stream is about value added to the business through a feature in the product, usually. And this means you look at how the feature evolves from needs and wants that are either intuited by senior leaders in your organizations, found through market research, or discovered through a product discovery process. No matter how you get to it, you end up having a feature request, and that needs to go through a few steps. First, usually I'm gonna talk about large companies here because that's where things will hit the most, but this applied to certain extent to smaller companies as well. And in a large company, usually the first thing that happens is you get a business analyst who gets that request, starts analyzing it, discusses with architects, discusses with a lot of marketing, legal, whatever. And they come up with a proposal for a solution that goes to a planning phase where they write user stories. We'll assume an agile organization of some sort. So they usually write user stories, they put acceptance criteria. Maybe there are some things related with architecture that architects need to discuss between themselves and with other teams. And then the work gets distributed between agile teams. Typically, you'd have a team that is, or a few teams that are working on backend, and one or more teams that's doing the front end in 3 different ways: web, mobile, iOS, and mobile Android. And these tend to be separate teams in many organizations that we've seen. Or maybe there's one front-end team, but the work is split between the specialized developers. And then the feature is tested, put in production. It undergoes certain tests, certain validations, maybe a security validation, and so on. And eventually it ends up in production. So that would be a, let's say, more or less typical flow in a large organization. And now let's look at how AI assistants can change each steps. And I'm going to assume, and we will be talking right now about AI assistants, which means that you have augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence. Augmented intelligence means that a person is working with an AI assistant to augment their abilities, not that you have independent agents that are, for example, creating documents, writing code, and so on. On one hand, I think this is still very risky. It still needs to be proven, the agent's way of work. We will discuss this in a future video if you are interested. But right now, let's discuss about the more conservative approach, which is we start from here and then we adopt AI assistants at every step of the way. And maybe those assistants get specialized training in specific things. By the way, we are also going to ignore legal copyright concerns. Those are perfectly valid, but we'll assume that they are solved somehow, sorted out. Maybe we use an internal large language model based on an open model, or maybe we are just certain that the companies are doing AI are doing what they promise, which is not to use our data to train further their products. Okay. But we'll simplify and assume that this is solved. All right, so you have a business analyst first, and what they need to do is to take that feature. There might be some UX as well, user interface design involved, and so on. Now, here's what's interesting. Normally, the way you would do this is to write very specific documents. And a first step would definitely be to say to an AI assistant, help me write this document. This is what I know. Ask any questions you might have. You have a conversations, you generate a document, and you finish your job as a business analyst, which means that you can do more requests in a shorter time and maybe with a better accuracy. You might also use an AI assistant to review the document. So maybe you generate it and then you start another context window, another chat, and you validate that you haven't missed anything. And this approach can apply at every level, at every step of the way, right? So a UX designer might generate something and then improve it. UI designer might generate something, then improve it. A developer might generate some code and improve it. You could write the user stories using AI assistants based on an existing document and improve it. You could write tests and so on. So this would be the first level of using AI assistants, which is basically Everybody's still doing their own jobs, but they are doing that faster with the help of AI assistants. And look, I'm assuming when I say faster, I know that there were some experiments in which actually things went slower because AI generated stuff took longer to fix than if you were doing it from the very beginning from scratch. And that's definitely a concern. However, the thing that I noticed is that there are good ways of using the assistants and to avoid this. And the idea here is to go in a very incremental way, which means you have a clear goal, you solve that goal, generate something that can be used to resume the conversation, maybe move to another context window, another chat, start from there, have another goal, enhance what you have, and keep going like that. And this tends to go really well, and it speeds up the development and the overall process. However, if you ask it to generate a lot of things, then indeed it will have a lot of issues, and then you need to fix the issues and so on. Now, the second level is once we've done this and we see that assistants are working, the question becomes now, do we actually need those documents? The reason we were creating documents is because we have all these specialized roles that do very specialized things, and their job is, let's say, too difficult to be done by somebody else. But we know that there are specific contexts, like extreme programming, where you have organizations like Unruly who involved developers from the business case all the way down to deployment and maintenance and operations. So we know that this is possible, but until recently this was possible only with people of a certain personality who wanted to do certain things, wanted to expand themselves, wanted to solve problems rather than write code, for example, or write documents. So now the question becomes, can we get to a point where using AI assistants, we can actually do more with less? And that's the interesting part. That's where things start to get really interesting. So here's a potential approach. Remember that what we really need, if we are talking about an agile context, what we've learned actually in software development and is well defined in an agile context is that working software is the only measure of progress. Documentation is useful, but there are two types of documentation. There's kind of working documentation that we write just to get us to the point where we can finish and have working software. And then we have the type of documentation that we use to maintain the software. Design documents, architecture decision records, diagrams, even specifications, right? Flows in the application, how things are working and so on. We were writing certain types of documents because we needed to pass information. But now maybe we have a better way of passing information. So let's assume you have a business analyst. and the business analyst looks at the requirements. But instead of writing a document, what they can do is to generate a working prototype. So they could generate a working prototype that has a specific UI, a specific UX, that is not working perfectly. The goal here is not to have something that works perfectly, is to have something that exemplifies, that shows the feature in practice, how it would look once it's done, and get feedback on that. And this would be one of the first steps towards building a working software. And you can take that prototype and go to your stakeholders and go to marketing and go to legal and say, look, this is what we want to do. Let me show you. This is what's happening here. This is what's happening. Are we missing anything? Do we want anything different here? You can go to your product manager. You can go to the person who requested, to the business, as it's commonly used in large organizations, and say, okay, is this what you want? And they could say, oh, yes or no. So now you have a first validation. Now, maybe you generate this in Figma, and then you use Figma as input for the actual development. But maybe you actually build it with the same technologies that the team is building software. Well, the user interface, because that's basically what you want. A lot of things can be hard-coded. And you don't have to know how to write code in order to do that. Although it might be helpful. Because maybe the business analyst knows how to write code but hasn't done it for a long time, and now suddenly, with the help of an AI assistant, they can be enabled to write code again. Not production code, but code that can be used for getting feedback. So this would mean faster feedback on something that actually works. In doing so, you also figure out some of the business rules, because one common thing that happens is that you start describing the rules in the document, describing the flows, but you miss interactions between them because they are very hard to see unless you actually do the work. So if you start by making the document and then you develop the product, that's the phase when you'll figure out, oh, we are actually missing some rules and you need some back and forth. So you could have a prototype, validate that prototype, pass it to developers and say, hey, look, this is what we need to do. And of course, you can also have a description of the user stories or whatever and say, these are actually the things that we need to implement. And this is just a prototype, but it's been tested, and we need to clone the same functionality, but in the real environment. And it's now your job to do that. Now let's go one step further. What if you'd have the business analyst working with a developer and they build this thing directly in production based on what the business analyst knows, but because now development can be much faster with the help of AI assistants, you actually build the thing, you validate it, and maybe it's not perfect, all right? Maybe you are building it still like a, let's say, semi-prototype. Not a throwaway prototype, but just like, we are adding something here it's not enabled in the product, nobody can see it, or maybe it's just a few people can see it. And we put it in the product. It's the result of a collaboration between business analysts and developers. And we get feedback from legal, from marketing. We make the changes that are required. And maybe it's not yet ready, right? Because you still need to write tests, you still need to improve the design, make sure it's production ready, do pen testing, a lot of different things that you still need to do. But instead of writing a document, you are now building the software and doing this earlier in order to get early feedback. This is interesting. Okay. Now, could it be that a developer could do that? Well, maybe. It depends on the organization. In some organizations, this is far, far too complex and requires a lot of coordination time. If you need to send emails, if you need to send meetings with marketing, with legal, with IT, ops, with architects, this might be quite a lot of things to do. But what if you'd have some of those encapsulated in AI assistants? So maybe you have an AI assistant that takes all the legal stuff that you've already done. You have a marketing assistant that has all the marketing stuff that's already been done and is trained on it. You have an architect assistant who is trained on all the diagrams and ADRs and from your organization. And now instead of going to different people, well, I believe you'll still go to those people. But until you go to those people, the first step could be, okay, I'm a developer, this is the request. And now let's try to take this and say, how does this fit with existing architecture? What are the requirements from marketing? What are the requirements from legal? Let's generate a prototype. We now have something we can check. And by the way, it's almost ready for production. So if you can validate all the different things that the assistants have told me and that we've included in the product, now it's just a matter of review. So we can review it from different perspectives, fix any of the things that are not great, and we have working software, almost ready for production. Now, maybe you expect me to go even further and say, okay, but what if we train assistants on development and they do the development and then you only do the review? Well, here's where things start to get a little bit messy, because at least from my experience, if you give AI assistants a lot of things to do, a large requirement, it will be very hard, one, to understand, two, to find issues with it. So I'm still not sold on the whole idea of AI will replace developers. Maybe at some point. But right now, as I said, I'm seeing mostly as a way to enhance, to augment the intelligence of existing people. But if we are in this context, basically what you have is people doing discovery or coming up with ideas, and then you can have one or two developers who generate prototypes and who can validate these prototypes and review them from various perspectives. Maybe you'll have a business analyst involved, because for reviews, you might have different people who, once again, are difficult to find. Maybe you need to schedule meetings and so on, but you need to make the reviews. And you end up with less paperwork, with less less working documentation. You still need the end documentation, by the way, if you want to actually develop further that product and understand what's going on. So that can become a developer-centric world pretty quickly, where we move much faster. And now think about some of the things that developers are doing in large organizations. If you are using microservices, you'll probably do some REST APIs. You'll probably do open API specifications, and then implementation, and then documentation and contract tests. And most of those are relatively easy to be generated with the help of AI assistants. I'm not saying they will do 100% perfect job, but because the context is so small, you could start from, this is the requirement, please generate the open API spec for this. And then you review that, you see what's missing, you fix it, and so on. Now let's generate the contract test for this. You see what's missing, you add some more, and so on. Now let's generate the microservice that fits these. Again, you might go one by one, let's say one endpoint by endpoint, or request by request, because you want to go incrementally in order to understand what's going on. And you could get code that works, and then you need to review that, and so on. So because we already in large organizations, we have standardized a lot of these things, it's becoming easier to speed things up with the help of AI assistants. So to me, it's only a matter of time until we get to that point where the roles start to blur. And there's another thing that could start blurring, which is, we used to have this idea of a full stack developer, but it has become pretty hard to do once the UI has become so complex. So as long as you are doing basic HTML applications with server-side rendering or some Ajax, that was still okay. But once you got into, you need to know React and Swift for iOS, and you need to know Java for Android, and all those frameworks, and whatever else you are using as libraries, and so on. And I think there's still place for developers who are specialized in specific things. But now, a developer who has an AI assistant might actually be able to be a full stack developer once again. Because you could write the backend, you could write the front end in 3 different technologies with the help of AI assistants. And I don't see this as very far-fetched. Okay, maybe you'll need to learn a few things because UI is fundamentally different from backend. There's more interactivity, there are more events there. Yeah, so there are things that you need to know. And maybe front-end developers are more likely to become full stack now with the help of AI assistants. But those lines might start to blur. Also, okay, you know iOS development, but if you know one mobile development platform, the principles for the interface are similar. And you don't know how to write the code, but with the help of an AI assistant, you might be able to say, this is the interface that I've created. Let's now do the same in Android. And you get something similar. So it's possible that you'll see teams that get merged and you get fewer people working on mobile apps or front end, fewer people working in backend, or people who worked in backend working also for front end, people working for front end also working for backend. You might start to see this kind of mix, and developers who also start from a request rather than from a wholly analyzed business requirement. And they just generate a prototype, verify that prototype with various assistants, and then validate with people to get the final decision. So you see, things might start to get very interesting here. Now, before we close, I am aware that there are some organizations who are doing this in a completely different way. Some organizations have asked developers to use AI for everything. They use AI to generate code. The code has a lot of issues. They then go and fix those issues, and those fixes are used to train the AI in order to generate better code next time. So they are basically training AI assistants to take over their jobs. And this is a dark pattern, right? It's not something that I believe it's obviously not nice. But more than that, it's likely that it will backfire. It's likely that at least the current generations of AI assistant, and by current generations I mean the AI assistants that use the current model, large language models, or even future, because one of the things with large language models is that they are now improved incrementally. They don't have leaps. They are just incremental. We will see more incremental improvements, but there are a lot of fundamental problems still not solved. And I think if you try to completely replace developers with AI, this will backfire sooner rather than later. However, we might see fewer developer jobs or fewer developers working for a large product. This does not necessarily mean that we'll have fewer jobs, because organizations might be interested in starting new products, more and more products, or speed up the development even more by adding more teams in order to speed things up. So we don't know yet what will happen there. There's definitely a trend right now to restructure jobs in IT, but we are not sure yet this is a stable situation, right? It might happen that next year things get turn around and they are hiring more developers, or they are hiring them back to fix some of the issues generated by AI, or you'll have more startups who need developers. Who knows? So this pattern is not that great. But doing augmented intelligence, that one I think will fundamentally change the way we do software development, and not only. And this change will happen. It's coming. My prediction is next year it will start, but maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe something else will happen, and maybe we'll see it in a couple of years. But this is where software development is going. At least that's what I believe, based on 20 years of experience of transformations with large organizations who have software development. So what do you think about all this? Is this something that you see? Have you started using AI assistants? Have the lines started to blur yet? Or are you just using AI assistants to speed up the same things that you were doing before? Let us know in the comments. As I said, we love comments. We love to have interesting conversations with you. And don't forget, like, share, subscribe, tell other people. Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart. See you next Saturday.